So today I started a grievance process for all of my FFS procedures that I've gone through against the Department of Managed Healthcare in the state of California, Anthem, which was my health insurance at the time in 2019, and the surgeon in the surgical center that I was at. So if you want to hear about that, this is the video, and for now anyway, and I apologize for the white noise. I just literally turned my phone on in the doctor's office, so it's a good 40-minute rant about the standards of care and state of transition-related and gender-affirming healthcare, which of course does not need to be taken away. In fact, it needs to be way better than it is. So stay tuned for 40 minutes of me talking about it. All right, we're going through the grievance process from all of this FFS drama. So yeah, do you want me to start from the beginning? Okay. So yeah, like I said, my FFS process so far has been 4 surgeries and possibly counting, which is like completely unethical to put someone so needlessly through like multiple unnecessary rounds of anesthesia, through reconstructive surgeries, and a lot of the issues came from just like personal neglect on the surgeon's part, but also like systemic sort of not enough time or thoroughness or standards of care in terms of how these decisions are made and how they're made with an intersectional sensitivity to race and ethnic background, as well as just like, you know, I mean, I drew lines in the sand many times and they were like pushed past. So yeah, so initially in 2018, I had an FFS procedure with Dr. Satterwhite, and that was just forehead, and part of that was because that's all that I said, but also the only reason why I said that was because there was no like process for like, you know, having sort of working as a team and having like discussions and having like time to reflect and make decisions and understand what is being done to my face and how that is going to impact every part of my life. And in my case, it has negatively impacted my income for a long time. Like probably 50% of my income has been gone over the past 4 years of dealing with this process. And that's not only because of recovering from surgery, it was because I had a public speaking job as well as a sort of performer job. And so I wasn't getting hired after having such a bad surgical outcome. And not only that, but, you know, like the reason why the surgery was covered is to treat gender dysphoria. So that's the medical necessity, and if a patient, in my case, like I explained what I was dysphoric about, and then, you know, just because of disorganization and just like, I don't know, not caring, a lot of decisions were made that I would consider to be cosmetic in terms of the facial fat volume on my cheeks and lips, which I've had multiple surgeries to try to remove. There's actually no medical or documented correlation between like initial or testosterone puberty, or like, if we're thinking of gender as a binary, there's no like biological correlation between like facial fat volume and gender. So that, I think, right off the bat was out of the scope of medical necessity, as well as it was marketed and upsold to me at the pre-op appointment as being youthful and volumizing, and that's it. Like, that was all the information that I was given. So in my head, I was like, okay, that sounds like a facial, like, I'm getting older, like, let's go for it, and there was no conversation, there was no risk talked about, like, how much facial volume would be increased, because you can, like, grossly change the entirety of someone's face by pumping it full of fat, as well as how hard it is to remove and revise. And it's extremely hard to remove and revise. There's a huge amount of nerve paralysis risk in your face, which would, like, I've been very lucky. I've had fat removed twice. I do have some numbness from multiple procedures, 3 procedures now on my lips. I can still move my face, but there's numbness that is, permanent and unnecessary. And it's extremely hard to take out. And I went to 8 different surgical consultations after the second round of FFS that I had in 2019, when all of these sort of like reckless recommendations were made on Dr. Satterwhite's part, and some of those recommendations were taken by me at pretty inappropriate times with an inappropriate amount of information. But some of the things I did consent to, and then some of the things were like points of contention, even like minutes before the surgery, which at that point is like totally illegal, unethical. There's like so many power dynamics and sort of like psychological manipulations being used to, like, if I'm going in for surgery, I don't want the surgeon to be in a bad mood, during the surgery, or like doing less than, as good as the surgeon can possibly perform. So, like, the things that I say to the surgeon beforehand, as a patient, like, I'm powerless, and like making all of these considerations in my head of like, well, now here we are, like the morning of the surgery, and in retrospect, like, I wish I had just walked out of the hospital, which is like extremely dramatic, and yet it still would have been much less drama than having multiple reconstructive surgeries and trying to find legal support now. Like, I mean, in retrospect, like, that's what I wish I would have done. And there were things that I said. Like, the other thing too is like, I'm Cajun French. Most people know Celine Dion. She's also Cajun French. She has a big nose. It's a French nose. A lot of people in my family look like that, including, like, that's how my nose looked beforehand. And like, doing rhinoplasty is another procedure that's extremely hard to reconstruct and extremely hard to revise, which is why it's so important to have every possible consideration made before the procedure is done. so that, you know, the person knows what, like, so that there's some, like, fully clear common ground between the patient and the provider. We talked about it for less than 5 minutes. I said in the pre-op, so this is like already I'm considering this. So I can start, because there's multiple procedures, I have to like think about how each one went. So the consultation process for the second procedure was in 2019. I went back to Dr. Satterwhite and I was like, I do see what you mean in terms of like facial harmony, like when you take, you know, bony mass off the forehead, it does make the nose seem more prominent than before. And I said, can we do just like a subtle reduction on the bump of my nose? And that was the consultation process. And that was pretty much the entire consultation process. And Dr. Satterwhite said, sure. And then I didn't see him again for months, you know, like 4 months. And by that point, it was the pre-op. You got one consult, one pre-op, and then there's the surgery. So I show up for the pre-op, and I walk into the office thinking, okay, like we're going to do what we talked about in the consult. There's no reason for me to think anything else was going to happen. And at the same time, I wanted to be open to talk about anything that we didn't cover. And so I go to the pre-op and say, I'm open to talking about my chin too, because I realize like if you make the nose a little bit smaller, you know, the chin might seem big, but my mom has a square chin. Like, you know, a lot of the facial features that we're talking about have an intersection of race. And so I was very hesitant to agree, and I actually left the pre-op. Okay, so at the pre-op appointment, I said, okay, so can we do a partial reduction on the dorsal hump of my nose? And Dr. Satterwhite, during the pre-op appointment, and I quote, said, typically a feminizing rhinoplasty would be to take the bump completely off, tilt the tip of the nose up, and pinch the tip. Which is just racism. Like, if we're just talking about cis women's noses, like, that's not how everyone's looks. So when he said that, I was kind of like, there also was like this weird sort of like time pressure constraint on these conversations because it was the pre-op appointment. And when he said all of that, I was like thinking in my head, I was like, maybe I don't understand, or maybe I don't know how much he's going to take off of, you know, the dorsal hump or the tip or whatever. So I think I like asked about it, but I was like, okay, like I don't understand why the default would be anything other than what's ethnically appropriate. And I'm sure you can tell by my nose, like, you know, people don't have noses like that generally, unless it is like at least partly because of familial facial feature. So anyways, he said all that, and I was kind of like, okay. But then again, because there's no like imaging being done, there's no like visual representation of like, this is what I mean when I say that. And there's no law saying that these providers need to provide a visual representation of what they're recommending. And this gets into the just like classist mess of the whole situation, because if you go out and get an FFS consult with some of the like high dollar surgeons in San Francisco, you literally leave with like rendered computer image photos of your face. And yet if you go through insurance, you're getting nothing. Like, you're getting these sort of like wham bam appointments and all of these recommendations being made, and without any way of knowing like how much or how much bone are you going to remove from my face, how much like fat are you going to inject into my face. Like, there's no accountability, and there was no communication of any of that. It was just sort of like this attitude of like, well, this is what's feminine, and so this is what I recommend, and you're sort of down to the line, so like, what do you want? And so that's how the rhinoplasty conversations went. And in retrospect, like, why was it okay to say during the consult, yeah, sure, we can just do a little bit off the hop? And then why did it transform into, well, you need to do this and this and this as well at the pre-op, which is a week before the surgery. Like, that's already such a high stress and high pressure time for a patient to be like, you know, juggling like their aftercare, like their blood work, you know, their finances, like all of these responsibilities, like navigating family support or chosen family support or whatever to go through these surgeries. And then on top of that, to be like also having to make these decisions blindly because there's no visual representation. There's only like this sort of like the word, you know, of this person who's like a supposedly like anthropological expert on gender, who's the surgeon, right? But like, no intersection of race was even considered. I mean, obviously I'm a white person, but like, still with every single person, there's going to be familial facial features that are a part of more than just their gender or their gender assigned at birth or whatever. Like, every single person is going to have like this, which I don't know why that conversation never happened. Like, the intake really should be like, if it is what's being covered, you know, what's being marketed is facial feminization surgery, which is the reversal of the development of what was developed during a testosterone puberty. Not like, how do we like fit into some sort of like racist societal cosmetic beauty standards. So because then it's like, it's erasure, you know, for me. Like, I don't look like my family anymore. That's a pretty brutal reality, like every time I look in the mirror. And some of that has been reconstructed because I had one reconstructive surgery on my nose so far, and 2 reconstructive surgeries to remove the fat lumps from my cheeks and lips. And partly too is that the only thing that was said to me about the risks of the fat graft was that Dr. Satterwhite said, well, the thing that happens most often is that people come back and they want more because it reabsorbs. And in my case, it was exactly the opposite. None of the fat reabsorbed, and it left these like visible contouring deformities on my cheeks and lips, which Dr. Satterwhite afterward, like during our conversations after the surgery, said that I had duck-billed deformity, and then said that this is from the surgery, from the procedure, and something else, which was just like, and then simultaneously was like, well, this is a good result. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, so then we were like butting heads afterward about like, he was saying like, this is a good result. And I was like, this is not what we talked about, and I had no idea that you were going to do this, and this is affecting my life in X, Y, and Z ways, and I can't work now, and I can't look at my face on video, and that's part of my job. And so at that point, this was like, these conversations were happening like within maybe 9 months post-op to a year post-op, because like the first 6 to 9 months is sort of like you're told to like chill out, like you're still healing, like it's going to be 9 to 12 months before you even have like a sense of what the final result is going to be. And so all those conversations were sort of like pushback. But then at 9 months, we started talking about it, and I was like, I don't even look like the same person. Like, and I have, so the other thing is that I started recording the conversations that I had with Dr. Satterwhite, because I was like, this is insanity. Like, I can't believe that all this sort of back and forth that I'm getting, and all of this, like just the things that he was saying, like, oh, this is a great result. And then I have him also saying, like in a recording, we shouldn't have done that surgery. We should have just stopped at the forehead. And I'm like, at that point, I'm just sort of gagged, because I'm like, so you're telling me that, like, what? Like, you're saying now that you made this mistake, or we made the mistake together, which is true, right? Like there is sort of a sort of blind faith on my part. Shouldn't be in a situation where I have to take this sort of blind faith. Although, obviously every surgery comes with risks that involve that. It should be minimized as much as possible. And so at that point, a revision was scheduled. So no. First, at that point, he was like, okay, well, let's send you to get Kybella, which is an injectable treatment to try to remove some of the fat in your cheeks and lips. And that is like, you swell up for a month afterward. And I did that 4 times. So my face was like, for 4 months straight, was like ballooning and shrinking and ballooning and shrinking. And then it didn't work. The Kybella didn't work. It was an experimental therapy to try to remove fat. So then I started I started doing consults. I booked a revision for Dr. Satterwhite to remove some of the fat in my lips. And then he canceled it because he thought it was unethical to continue working with me, which is honestly probably the only ethical thing that I agree with that he did. Because at that point, the trust was completely broken and, eroded. And I had also confronted him about, like, why did you pressure me to take 2 millimeters of projection off my chin the morning of the surgery? Like, that feels like completely inappropriate. It feels like intimidation. Like, 2 millimeters off the projection of my chin is not like a biological marker of gender. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not. Like, that's like your vision. And like, for you to be pushing your vision on me the morning of the surgery is like, I should not. And I think, as far as I know, I don't understand the laws that are actually in place around these surgeons and things they can say, but I think that it was actually illegal. And if you look at my medical notes, like that JM had read over to me, like, after this surgery, it says in the pre-surgical notes, like from the pre-op appointment, that I was unclear of what I wanted and unclear of what we were deciding on to do. And yet, it all still happened, which is like, like from my perspective, like the things that I was considering at that time was like, well, I waited a year for this surgery. I fought 2 surgical appeals and an independent medical review to gain access to this surgery. It's already been like a year in the making. I took off work for 6 weeks. Like, there's so much resources that I've already sacrificed to, you know, be in the stage that I'm in the position that I'm in. So, like, rescheduling the procedure is, you know, also a huge loss. I mean, anyways. But yeah, Dr. Satterwhite said we shouldn't work together anymore, and I was like, I kind of agree. And at the same time, like, in my naivety, I was like, can you just fix what you did? But it's like not possible. So, anyways, I started doing consultations. Oh, the other thing that's totally outrageous about this situation is that Dr. Satterwhite, at the time I was living in Oakland, I had Anthem, the only surgeon that was in the medical network of Medi-Cal. Anthem was Dr. Satterwhite, so I didn't even get the experience beforehand to go through the process of doing multiple consultations, which I actually think that everyone should have to do, because once you do, you start to realize that as many consultations as you do, you're going to get that many amount of differences of opinion and recommendations. But I didn't have any of that, and Dr. Satterwhite should have said, like, during the consultation process, like, if he's really invested in surgical outcomes, he would say, like, I recommend you go to see at least 3 to 5 other surgeons to get a sense of, like, how different people, just to get a sense of, like, what the consultation process is like, so that you have, you know, can make an informed decision, not a decision out of the scarcity of having one surgical option that's covered by your insurance. So, but he is not, he doesn't have that infrastructure to think about surgical outcomes. I don't think it was personal. I think it was just, like, neglectful and systemic, that there's no, if he doesn't have to go the extra mile to ensure, you know, surgical outcomes, like, he is not going to. So, anyways, I didn't do any other consultations until I started doing revision consultations. And then I did 8, which I had to schedule on my own, paid for out of pocket. I pretty much know every FFS surgeon in the Bay Area now, as well as some in LA. And I had to fight for a revision to be done through my health insurance, which is also, like, you know, harder than it needs to be. But after doing all of these revision consultations to get most of what was done to my face reversed, because I was very clear of, like, and I said to Dr. Satterwhite, like, afterward, I was like, there's nothing gender related about the tip of my nose. Like, if you point the tip up, it's just like a cosmetic aesthetic. There's nothing about that has to do with, you know, testosterone puberty, or, you know, being assigned male at birth, whatever. And I was like, why did you do that? Why did you recommend that? And I think at that point was the time he was like, oh yeah, well, I guess we shouldn't have done that. And I was just like, how are we? And yet he got paid based on the amount of procedures that he did, and he kept the money. Like, and there's so many ethical options of, like, stuff that he could have done, like, oh fuck, Sparkle, like, oh, I really fucked you up, and this is gonna be really expensive. Here, like, you know, here's some money, or, like, I don't know, like, you know, you can use your imagination, you know. But anyways, so I go to, like, 8 different consultations. Then I start to hear about how challenging it is to do revisions, which made me feel like, well, then why is it so easy to get the surgery the first time, the way that the doctor wanted? And why was there no, like, safeguards put in place to prevent revisions from being necessary? And so that was brutal to learn how, like, negligent the pre-surgical planning process had been the first time around, because that really is the issue. If it had all been clear to me and on paper, and then I had been, even if I had been given like I want to do it like this, you want to do it like this, I think you should go to someone else. Like, that would have been great. That's not what happened. So, and again, I don't know why, I don't know where the entitlement comes from of, I want to make your body like this, and I understand that you want your body to be like this, but I'm going to push my agenda. Like, it's so violating, physically and, emotionally and everything. And, so I felt very violated from the whole situation of being pushed multiple times, like, sort of setting my boundary and then being pushed again at every possible opportunity, until I was put under anesthesia. And so anyways, I did all these consults because of, the just transphobia that we know exists. A lot of these surgeons, when I went for revision consults, my mental health was overly scrutinized. I was told that I was being a perfectionist. Like, I was just sort of dismissed and reacted to as if I was unstable, and not. And so I did 8 consultations. I decided to go with Dr. Seth, whose photos are there. No, it's fine. I like Dr. Seth.
Okay, cool. I was like, I'm sorry. I was like, I've heard good things about him, but I'm not sure.
No, every surgeon has good and bad,
of course, yeah,
things. But I like Dr. Seth. I've had surgery now with Dr. Seth twice to reconstruct my nose and to take fat out of my cheeks and lips. And I'm in a position now where, because of what is like technically possible to reconstruct in terms of rhinoplasty, I have to make inappropriate compromises off of my own body because of the damage that was done when Dr. Sadoway just obliterated my nose the first time around without having any sort of representation of what was going to be done. So anyways, so most of the surgeons I did not get a good vibe from out of the 8. A lot of them sort of defended Dr. Satterwhite and made me the target. And of course, there was also some that were compassionate and listened and took their own ego out of the room. And Dr. Seth was one of them, and he was at UCSF at the time. And so I moved forward, but he also told me over and over how risky it was to take the fat out. And I was in a position where I was like, I have nothing to lose at this point. Like, my life is kind of over. Like, my career is falling apart. Like, I had these huge unnatural mounds on my face, just hanging off of my cheeks and and totally uneven bumps all in my lips. And so I was like, I'll do anything, to me it's worth it to try to take it out. And at the same time, I had to get that procedure done twice because it's very difficult to if you start out with 30% facial fat volume, and then you get fat injected in your face, and then it's 110%. Getting back down to that exact level of 30 is basically almost impossible. So Dr. Seth had to take out 30% at a time, and then 30% more, which means multiple rounds of anesthesia, multiple rounds of recovery.
all to get to where I was before. So that's where I'm at now. It's been 2 procedures and counting with Dr. Seth, and you know, and a reconstructive rhinoplasty procedure, and then I, over the course of this process, tried to talk to lawyers, and I contacted Transgender Law Center. I contacted, you know, anyone that had any sort of like cultural sensitivity to trans issues in the Bay Area. I tried to talk to, and everyone declined to take the case. And then eventually someone said, well, for one, you're probably out of the statute of limitations because it's been more than 12 months since the initial procedure happened. And at the same time, like, you know, there's this issue with the statute of limitations in the state of California, which is like, you can't, like for the victim to talk about such a traumatic thing that affected every part of their life, like, of course people are going to prevent, you know, like having to have those conversations and avoid getting legal help until it's too late. How convenient, right? For the doctors and for, you know, the government or whatever. So, anyways, I eventually had a lawyer say, look, it's basically almost impossible to win a medical negligence or medical malpractice case in the state of California unless you die. And I was like, and so at that point I gave up trying to talk to lawyers. I am interested in, you know, talking to some, and I do think that I am entitled to pain and suffering. I mean, you know, my social worker, like, the way I describe this experience is like, look, the impact on my life and the impact on my appearance and my face is equivalent to like having your face smashed in a car accident. But the difference is, if you get your face smashed in a car accident, like, you're probably going to get an insurance settlement. And with this, because it's gender affirming and, you know, X, Y, and Z, there's nothing. There's no protections. There's no, that I know of, there's no resources. There's no organizations. This is it. It's like you and I talking now and filing a grievance, and I don't even know what, you know, will come of it. But that's the situation that I'm in, and no one should have to go through this. So, you know, and now I'm on a do not return call list at Align Surgical. Like, I tried to reach out multiple times to file a grievance on my own, and they won't call me back. And you know what's hilarious? The only reason why I joke that I'm on a do not call list is that one time I didn't save my name, and they called me back and they're like, oh, do you want to consult with one of our surgeons? And then the times that I did call back and say my name and why I was calling, because I want a grievance form, they never returned my call. So, wow, that's my rant. No, you're good. Thank you for recording that. Some of them